Hey, what's up? Hello, everyone. Welcome into Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name is Matt.
My name is Dyl, and before we review the biggest hit of the 2024 domestic box office, if you are new here, Matt and I talk award season all year long. We host a Discord server where you can discuss all the new movie news with us in a fun and lively community, and we would love to hear your thoughts on this movie down below. Disney and Pixar's Inside Out 2 returns to the mind of the newly minted teenager Riley just as headquarters is undergoing a sudden demolition to make room for something entirely unexpected: new emotions. Joy, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust, who've long been running a successful operation by all accounts, aren't sure how to feel when anxiety shows up. And it looks like she's not alone. Inside Out 2 released in cinemas this weekend, so let's talk all about it. And honestly, I loved Inside Out 2. Pixar once again proves their unparalleled prowess in the art of animation, consistently outdoing themselves with each and every new release. The character designs are more vibrant and detailed than ever, the world building is immersive and imaginative, and the flashes of realism are simply awe-inspiring. The true stand of Inside Out 2, however, is its sense of humor. After rewatching the first film the night before and indulging in this new installment here, I found myself delighted by how often I was giggling throughout. There's this sequence involving a new character named Bluefy that had me cackling uncontrollably, and I found our Fab Five emotions retained all their original charm and elevated their comedic moments from the first film. What truly touched me about this installment, though, was how the film tackled emotions, both the familiar ones and the new ones we are introduced to. I was moved by the nuanced portrayals of each emotion, emphasizing their pros and cons and how they all come together to create the complex tapestry of our inner selves. The film beautifully illustrates how every emotion plays a crucial role in making us who we are. To conclude why I loved Inside Out 2, I found myself deeply resonating with this installment. Riley's journey resonated with me on a very personal level, and I saw myself in many of her experiences. The joy of playing a sport you love, the fear and uncertainty of changing schools, the sadness of losing close friends due to circumstances just out of your control, the anxiety of wondering who likes you for who you really are, the embarrassment of expressing your inner interests and facing judgment, the envy of just wanting to fit in, the disgust over past actions and their impacts on loved ones, the anger of failing to achieve personal goals you set out for yourself, and the ennui of just growing older. All of these emotions were portrayed so vividly, just making this film a very emotional and relatable experience for me.
I'm so sorry to rain on your parade, Dylan. I feel so bad. It's 2 years in a row now that we're talking about a new Pixar movie, and I have to take the more negative side to this. I'm just going to put a disclaimer up front before I go on a very long rant here. I don't hate this movie. I do not hate Inside Out 2. As much as it's going to sound like Inside Out 2 killed my dog, spit in my face, and set my house on fire, this is not a terrible film, and a lot of it worked. If you go into this wanting a sequel to a film that you love, that really resonated with you, I feel like you're going to get a lot out of this. Although I can't imagine anyone watching this and saying that it improves on the original film. It's really just more of the same. But that said, it's still enjoyable enough. It's got some really great humor. You mentioned Bluefy. I really liked Lance. I thought that was my favorite bit in the film. The PS2 swordsman cartoon character I thought was a major standout in the film's sense of humor. And the film's honestly probably going to move most audiences, although anyone looking to be emotionally wrecked in the same way that they were with the first film will probably be a little disappointed. There's no Bing Bong. There's no Bing Bong equivalent. You're not going to cry in this movie. I doubt it, at least. But I will say, and to get into my much more negative stance here, the film made me feel a little bit of sadness around the current state of Pixar, and it's sort of recontextualizing the whole company for me. Now, to be clear, I've always adored Pixar. My dad is a huge tech geek, and he idolized Steve Jobs and Apple. And so growing up, I was introduced to Pixar because of my dad's love of Steve Jobs and his hand that he had in creating Pixar. These films really defined my childhood. We wore out the DVD copies of Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, and The Incredibles, and later on, Ratatouille gave me the confidence that I needed to become an artist, and WALL-E made me appreciate the beauty of humanity and the world, and Up is just one of my favorite movies of all time. Of Pixar's 28 feature films, 5 of them are in my top 50 movies, so you could definitely call me a bit of a Pixar fanboy. But what first made Pixar truly great and stand out in the field of storytelling, I think, has actually recently become a little bit of their downfall, and that's the corporate nature of the studio. Pixar is first and foremost a tech company above all else. That's what they were founded as. That's why Steve Jobs was involved. And that's why my dad was obsessed with them all the way back when I was a kid. Part of Pixar's investment in the tech of computer-generated animation was also in bringing in some of the most talented creatives in the world to define what a Pixar story is like. But what I think's happened in the past 10 to 15 years is that the magic of a lot of those original creatives has largely gone away. The inspiration that Pixar was founded with is now really just people who grew up watching Pixar and are trying to emulate it for themselves. And while a lot of the creatives are gone, the corporate heads are still there. And I think that they feel like, because they've done this so many times now, because they've focus grouped out these films so many times, that they feel like they can distill creativity down into a formula, which is just not true. Once you've turned creativity into a formula, you don't have creativity anymore. You have a math equation. And that's what Inside Out 2 kind of felt like to me. It felt like a very slick math equation, distilling human emotion and the experience of growing up into something that checks boxes on a story formula. Now, before I get too deep into Inside Out 2, I do have to briefly touch on the first film, because Dylan, you rewatched this the night before you saw Inside Out 2. I also rewatched it the night before, and I really loved this movie when I first saw it. I think it spoke to me how I needed it to at the time, and I've watched it a few times since the first time, and I've always really loved it. Until this week. Now, I still really like the film, but something felt a little bit different. The nuance that I remember with the way it portrays emotions wasn't there. I found it really simplistic in how it approached the idea of your emotions having to live together. It was still super entertaining, but something was different. And I also found that the style of writing grew old quite fast, in that the way every scene plays out in Inside Out and Inside Out 2 is that something happens in the real world, and then we watch the emotions react to it. They say a funny quip, and then we go back to the real world, and it's like that over and over and over, about 200 times. And then we also have like an adventure going on in the brain, but really it's a reaction video for most of the film. But the main issue that I found in this watch of the first film is that it's so clear that the filmmakers truly see joy as the only good emotion. The film is all about letting your emotions live together and accepting that we can't always be happy, and that our other emotions are also a part of us, and not just part of us, but they're also useful. But that's all that the film portrays them as, useful. It's not like any of the other emotions are good, they just have a purpose. And so while it's not good to feel sad or disgusted or fearful or angry, those emotions still have use. But they're not good. At least that's how the film portrays them in my mind. Through both the first film and the second film, all of the other emotions are inconveniences. They are roadblocks. They are things that put up an issue in the way of Joy getting Riley back to being happy, because that's what she should be. And the sequel has this problem even stronger than the first film does. Every emotion has a purpose and a use, but again, only Joy is portrayed as good and worthy. And furthermore, I was just troubled by the way that the human mind was represented visually, taking the uniqueness of the individual person and turning it into a giant capitalist wasteland, with workers filling quotas of memories they have to delete, and a boardroom deciding everything, as well as a visual aesthetic that makes everything look like a giant empty Amazon warehouse, flat and boring. And I will say that it's fitting that a company like Pixar, which makes films through feedback in a corporate boardroom, makes a film that feels like the characters inhabit a corporate world and a corporate boardroom, speaking in corporate lingo with core memories and personality islands feeling like stand-ins for phrases like synergy and correlating overseas earnings report dynamics. This has been a theme in a lot of Pixar's other films like Monsters, Inc. or Soul, where corporations are what the film is about. But here it feels like the corporate coldness kills the individuality that Riley should have. Everyone is a corporation with executives making all the decisions, focus grouping out every single action we take. And frankly, it's just a bleak way to see the human mind. And this brings me to some of the recent quotes that have come out around the release of Inside Out 2, where Pixar is talking about how they want to stop making personal stories that act as a catharsis of a filmmaker and focusing more on universal stories. But some of Pixar's best work recently and forever has always been personal. Soul was about Kemp Powers reckoning with purpose in life and the meaning of existence in the first place. Turning Red was very strong, and it was about Domi Shi thinking about family legacy and being a daughter to a mother who is also a daughter to a mother. All of Pixar's best movies have felt deeply personal. And you know what's not personal? Cars 2. Lightyear. Those are their impersonal movies, and honestly, Inside Out 2 kind of feels impersonal, and it feels like a grim look at the path forward for Pixar. Films that appeal to our emotions in broad strokes, trying to touch on something that feels relevant to everyone's experience rather than narrowing in on specificity. It's that focus group, brain trust approach to making movies. How can we appeal to more people? How can we resonate with everyone? But to paraphrase The Incredibles, if everyone sees themselves in Riley, does anyone see themselves in Riley? But to give one big positive here, something I really always appreciate with Pixar is the themes. And I appreciated the core theme of Inside Out 2, which is that our experiences in the world shape our beliefs, not our emotions, is informed by our lived experiences and not by thought or emotion. I felt that that theme was really delivered quite well and was a mature way to tackle the subject matter. A lot of Pixar's films are about letting go, with Finding Nemo being about a father who needs to learn that his son needs to grow up on his own, or Toy Story 3 being about toys learning that their kid needs to move on and be an adult. And Inside Out 2 fits into that sort of same theme, with the emotions realizing they can't control Riley's life. Only Riley can do that. But right back to some of my issues with the film. While I do think Anxiety is a strong antagonist, a strong villain who wants to do right by Riley, but just keeps getting things wrong, doing more harm than good, I think that's a very reasonable way to portray Anxiety as something that wants to protect us, but ends up hurting us. I did feel, however, that the other emotions were poorly thought out and completely unneeded in the storyline. With how the previous film left off establishing emotions and memories as a combination of different emotions, I just feel like all of these new characters were already covered by existing emotions. Like, how is embarrassment not just a mixture of fear, disgust, and sadness? How is nostalgia not just a mixture of joy and sadness? Or envy being anger and sadness? And is boredom even really an emotion? Anxiety does feel more distinct because it's less of an emotion and something closer to a mental state, something that can be a mental illness. But that brings me to my next complaint about the film. It feels really disingenuous how it handles the lifelong battle with anxiety and mental illness. Anxiety isn't something that can just be solved over 3 days. It's a lifelong struggle. And it feels really wrong to me that the film wraps up in a way that makes it feel like everyone's content, saying that's it, they conquered anxiety. Anxiety's got a massage chair right over there in the corner that they can go and sit in and make sure that Riley doesn't worry too much. But the truth is, people need therapy. They need help to go through these emotions, not just to suppress those feelings with a massage chair. In the end, it feels like the film is saying, just choose to be happy. Just shove those other emotions to the side and choose to be happy. Those other emotions have a purpose, but just choose to be happy. And it sounds like what so many adults tell teenagers who are going through a rough time over and over. It's an oversimplification of the lifelong battle that many people face. Maya Hawke's great, though. Maya Hawke's great. No fault of hers.
I guess to combat that a little bit, I don't really see Anxiety really as a villain at all. I think she's kind of like a part of all of us. As shown in the film, she has moments of both positively helping out Riley and negative affecting her weekend. And I think just like Joy in the 2015 film, she is also positive and also a little bit negative. And I do agree with you, it isn't just summed up in one weekend sort of thing, but I think it's something that many people have to deal with, like day in and day out. They find the ways to, tighten it down for a little bit, and then it'll come back in later, as we see with the mom character in this movie, how her anxiety pops out and it's like, oh, you're back again. It's not like, oh, it's done forever. It can be a repetitive thing here and there. Then I don't think that the screenplay really paints joy as the only good emotion. I feel like both films do this pretty poignantly, at least to me, and showcase how every emotion has nuance, has positives, has negatives. I think if you're going to paint anyone to be kind of the villain of the first movie, it would be joy. Saying if you're only happy all the time, you're never really doing that well. And I think there's a really impactful scene in this film of Joy, where she herself is showing, hey, I'm not actually happy all the time. It's really hard to put on this front at all the time. I don't think any of these emotions are strictly beneficial or detrimental to Riley. It's just helping her feel naturally. And additionally, I think the corporate aspect kind of aligns perfectly with the headquarters angle. And maybe this is just a difference of perspectives here. Everyone's gonna have a different take of a movie, but I do think the mind is kind of like a workplace, and the emotions job is to keep Riley afloat. At least that's what they think. But as we learn alongside Joy, you can't force someone to feel something, and anxiety tries this as well. They both try to make them feel their own emotion, and shows that, hey, we need all of these to keep stuff afloat. You need to embrace sadness. You need to allow yourself to feel anxiety and to naturally build your sense of self that they do at the beginning and end of this installment. But getting back to some of my issues with this film, I agree with many people out there that Michael Giacchino's score is greatly missed in this one. I feel like it added a lot of extra substance and made some of those emotional moments hit just a little bit harder in the first time in that original movie that we don't really get this time around. But as I mentioned before, Inside Out 2 is funnier than its predecessor. I think this is a positive to me, but at times I can see where the humor does undercut some of the more potentially more emotionally poignant moments during the middle third of this film. And then my only other minor qualm with this film would be how the original did an amazing job of giving each emotion multiple moments to shine, and we always felt in sync with our Fab Five. And now when you add 4 more emotions to the mix, some characters get sidelined a little bit more often than I would have liked. But despite my minor issues, I believe that Inside Out 2 is the best Pixar sequel since Toy Story 3. It's a film I cannot wait to watch again, eager to catch new details and enjoy its nuances. Contrary a little bit to you, Matt, I found myself completely immersed and emotionally connected to Riley at every step of her journey. I found the new emotions to add a lot of new nuances to the plot, and I think the way that the creative team delved into the emotions was a lot more well-rounded and layered than just be happy, which I know isn't exactly what your point was there, but I cringed with her embarrassment. I felt the warmth of her joy and experienced the depth of her anxiety, and I think the box office numbers this week show that Inside Out 2 will continue to relate with a lot of audiences in terms of the humor, the heart, and the breathtaking animation. And on my initial viewing of this film, I'm gonna have to give it a very light 4.5 stars.
Look, I might have gone on like a 10-minute spiel there about how much this film disappointed me, but at the end of the day, I don't hate this. I'm just feeling quite jaded with Pixar at the moment. The film is formulaic. It feels shaped by the corporate atmosphere it was created in, simplifies some of the most difficult things and feelings that we have to deal with. However, it is still a mostly satisfying adventure. It does what you want an animated kids movie to do, has some strong comedic moments, and it does hit some of those emotional beats quite effectively. Even mediocre Pixar is still better than a lot of other stuff that's out there. And so even though I just trashed the film for probably 15 minutes straight, I am going to say I'm between a strong 5 out of 10 and a very light 6 out of 10 on this film. I think I'm leaning towards the light 6 out of 10, maybe just to be a little bit generous. But of course, we are an Oscar channel, so we have to talk about Oscar chances here. Well, for Best Animated Feature, Inside Out 2 is certainly getting nominated, but I do not see this winning. And while I do see a lot of people saying, oh, I think we've already got our winner, I think it's way too quick to call that, especially because this would be the weakest critically scored winner from Pixar ever. Even Toy Story 4, which some people say is one of Pixar's weaker animated feature winners, that was still quite a bit over 80 on Metacritic. I think it was at an 84, if I'm not mistaken, which is 10 points higher than what Inside Out 2 is getting from critics. So I do think that something else more acclaimed, more loved, more respected will come along and will win, but I think it's pretty safe to say that this one is getting nominated at least.
I share Matt's projection. I'm confident that Inside Out 2 will secure a Best Animated Feature nomination, following the tradition of basically every other Pixar film. But like similar outputs recently, such as Elemental, Luca, Turning Red, I think it is going to fall short of clinching that win. I see this being that contender that hits every precursor you call Globes, PGA, BAFTA, CCA, the Oscar, but really struggles to win basically anywhere. It's kind of just along for the ride where it's popping its head up saying, hey, we're here, but we can't overcome something like you said that's just better critically received and also that audiences will turn out to like. But I could see an angle where if this year does prove to be a little bit weaker like in 2019, maybe it can have a Toy Story 4 type trajectory and break that mold being the lowest Metacritic scored Pixar winner, but that would require a kind of weak field.
Which I don't think we'll have this year. There's quite a lot of animated films that are going to do very well with critics and hopefully as well with audiences. Now, I want to ask you this question because I did just say I feel pretty confident this is getting a nomination, but there has been a pattern that a lot of Pixar sequels do not get nominated. Look at Monsters University, look at Finding Dory. Those two films were largely projected to get nominations, and then they just did not show up in the lineup. Do you think there's a possibility that Inside Out 2 could share the same fate instead of how Toy Story 3, Toy Story 4, and Incredibles 2 were received?
I think the biggest difference between something like Incredibles 2 and Toy Story 4 compared to the likes of a Monsters University and Finding Dory is it changes who the subject of the film is about. Those films are either about those characters earlier in their life, or it's taking the side character being Dory and making her the protagonist. While here in Inside Out 2, it's still with our core five, they're just adding a new character into the mix, very similar to something like what Toy Story 4 did, where you still have your main core of toys, you just have a new toy or two who kind of joins the gang this time around. So, like I said before, I feel like this is going to be a movie that hits every stop along the way, just kind of for the reasons that you mentioned a little bit before, will come up short in the overall win at the end of the day.
I'm rooting for Memoir of a Snail. I'm just going to state that right now and wish it into existence. But anyways, that brings us to the end of our Inside Out 2 review. Let us know in the comments, what did you think of the movie? Are you siding with Dylan and saying this is one of the best Pixar sequels ever? Or are you siding with me and saying this was a large disappointment? Either way, we'd love to hear from you. And as always, thank you so much for watching. My name's Matt.
My name's Dyl, and this has been Fantasy Filmball.